All right, we are live, everything's on, and one of my buddies messaged me today that, hey, how are your stocks doing? So let's ask Grok, how are stocks doing today? Let's see. Let's see what Grok has to say. Stock market is showing signs of activity based on the most current data available. Okay. S&P 500 trading at 495 reflects a decline from its previous day, close of 505. Okay. Downward movement so far today. Here's a breakdown. The current price throughout the trading session, the price has fluctuated significantly. Open at 489, reached a high of 513, dropped to a low of 483 by 945. It was at 495, showing a slight dip from earlier peaks, but still above the day's low. This suggests volatility in the market today, with stocks experiencing both gains and losses within the session. The broader context from recent market reports indicate that stocks have been under pressure due to tariff-related concerns, with the S&P 500 having seen significant declines in the prior week. However, post on X as of this morning suggests a potential rebound, with some users noting that indexes like the Nasdaq and S&P 500 might be moving into positive territory or showing signs of recovery, though this is not yet fully reflected in the real-time data. Recent trends. Over the past month, S&P 500 has declined from 557 to 495 today, a notable drop of about 11%. Mixed sentiment, some optimism about a turnaround, Amazon possibly in the green, but also caution. What are all oh, what are all the causes for actually let's see decline. Grok is really good at context. Edging hard today 0.5% as the market tries to recover from another weekly decline. Okay. Performance today. Oh, 20th Feb. The fear and greed index serves as a tool to assess stock market trends and determine if stocks are reasonably priced. We're starting to see a turnaround. Some stocks like Amazon are in the green, Nasdaq recovering, most indexes showing a bit of a rebound, but that's temporary. Okay. Trade tariffs and global trade war fears, economic slowdown, recession concerns, inflationary pressures, tech sector weakness. Whoa. Magnificent 7 tech giants, Amazon down 9, Microsoft 2.4, key drivers of prior market gains have underperformed due to tariff exposure, high valuations, and regulatory scrutiny. The Nasdaq's 10.5% quarterly drop in Q1 25 underscores the shift. With tech no longer leading, the S&P 500 lacks a stabilizing force, exacerbating declines. Post on X highlight weak tech earnings as a compounding factor. Geopolitical uncertainty. Beyond tariffs, broader geopolitical risk like US China trade disputes and potential EU retaliation have rattled markets. Trump's erratic policy shifts, threatening 200% tariffs on European wines, add unpredictability, eroding investor confidence. Global spillover. European and Asian markets have followed the US downward, reflecting a synchronized global sell off tied to trade and geopolitical instability. Investor sentiment and risk perception. Sentiment has soured, with institutional investors slashing equity allocations. Deutsche Bank notes a dip to underweight and individual investor pessimism at a 2-year high. Psychological unwinding and forced risk reduction. Panic selling triggered by tariff news and amplified by volatility has created a self reinforcing decline. Monetary policy uncertainty, Fed's dilemma, strong March jobs data contrast with tariff driven inflation risk, leaving the Federal Reserve's next moves unclear. Investors fear a pause in rate cuts or even a reversal could tighten financial conditions, hurting stocks. Sector specific vulnerability, a 7% plunge in oil prices due to China's reduced demand amid tariffs hit the S&P 500 energy sector. Firms like Nike, down 14, and Delta Airlines, sharp drops, suffer from higher cost and weakening consumer confidence, dragging broader indexes lower. Primary driver, President Donald Trump's imposition of sweeping tariffs, starting with a baseline 10% on most US imports and escalating to higher reciprocal tariffs, 34% on China, 46% on Vietnam, has ignited fears of a global trade war. These policies announced recently have disrupted supply chains and raised costs for companies reliant on international trade. Companies like Apple, Nvidia, and Tesla with significant exposure to global markets saw sharp decline. Apple down 7.3, Nvidia 7.8. The S&P 500's 41% of revenues from overseas make it particularly vulnerable to trade disruptions. Retaliatory tariffs from trading partners like China and the EU amplify the pressure, reducing corporate profits and stoking market volatility. Economic slowdown and recession concerns. Recent economic data, though mixed, has heightened recession fears. While March jobs data exceeded expectations, other signals like a slowing services sector and tariff driven cost pressure suggested potential economic contradiction. Interesting. Driven by toxic mix of tariff induced trade disruptions, recession fears, inflationary pressures, tech sector weakness, geopolitical risk, shifting investor sentiment, monetary policy ambiguity, and sector specific challenges. What are okay, so let's see if primary driver is tariff, if primary driver is trade tariffs, let's understand what's happening. What are the latest update on trade tariffs imposed by President Trump? What is this? Grok. The latest on the latest on Trump tariffs. Oh wow. 10% baseline tariff on all US imports starting April 5, with higher rates like 54% on China effective April 9. Wow. Markets are volatile. US futures dropped and silver prices fell due to trade war fears and economic uncertainty. China's 34% retaliatory tariff adds pressure. Experts warn of a possible recession with GDP hits expected. What is the latest news on Trump tariffs? As I see, US futures and silver is down. What is the news now? Very interesting. People are able to just like start asking Grok right there. Here are the latest updates. Yeah, this is really cool. Because Grok has studied everything. If you are having a debate on certain topic, and literally just be like, hey Grok, tell me more. Hey Grok. And especially if you're talking about history, something that is extremely debatable, that hey, where was Leonardo da Vinci born? And two people are debating, no, he was born in the downtown Vinci versus he was born in the suburbs of Vinci. You can just be like, at Grok, where was he born? And you're like, oh, here. And you're like, perfect. Why are we debating? Let's move forward. Implementation and scope. I think using Grok will reduce the amount of number of tweets because debates will be settled faster. Wow. Using Grok, using @Grok @AskPerplexity will cannibalize the user activity or user content posting, whatever they call it, user engagement, not engagement, but specifically like posting, not just liking and commenting, but actually everything. @Grok and Ask Perplexity is going to reduce the amount of debates that are going to happen because debates are going to be settled faster. Okay, that's a good insight. We should tweet that. Today is will reduce user engagement on X because debates faster. Okay. Okay, next. Implementation and scope. April 2, Trump announced a sweeping tariff policy which began taking effect over the weekend. A universal 10% baseline tariff on all US imports started being collected by US customs agents. Whoa, whoa. So it has started. A universal 10% baseline tariff on all US imports started being collected by US customs agents as of 12 a.m. ET on April 5, 2025. Additionally, higher reciprocal tariffs targeting 57 specific trading partners deemed the worst offenders for trade imbalances were set to begin on April 9, 2025. These include China, an additional 34% tariff on top of existing 20% duties, bringing the total to 54%. European Union 20%, Vietnam 46%, Japan 24%. Canada and Mexico are exempt from the new reciprocal tariffs but remain subject to earlier 25% tariffs on most goods, with some exemptions under the USMCA framework. Oh wow, so reciprocal tariff is basically exactly what these countries have against US. Is that true? Are exempt from the new reciprocal tariffs but remain subject to earlier 25% tariffs on most goods, with some exemptions under the USMCA framework. On April 7, Trump escalated tensions with China, threatening an additional 50% tariff if China does not withdraw its retaliatory 54% tariff on US goods by April 8, 2025. Wow. Wow. This makes so much sense. This thread posted on social media also included a statement that all talks with China would be terminated while negotiations with other countries seeking tariff relief would begin immediately. All talks with China would be terminated while negotiations with other countries seeking tariff relief would begin immediately. This follows China's announcement on April 3 of a 34% tariff on all US products starting April 10, alongside export controls on rare earths and sanctions on 27 US firms. Wow. On April 7, Trump escalated tensions with China, threatening an additional 50% tariff if China does not withdraw its retaliatory 34% tariff on US goods by April 8, 2025. This threat posted on social media also included a statement that all talks with China would be terminated while negotiations with other countries seeking tariff relief would begin immediately. This follows China's announcement on April 3 of a 34% tariff on all US products starting April 10, alongside export controls on rare earths and sanctions on 27 US firms. Wow. Okay, so China is also going after it. They are like, okay, we are not going to give our rare earth. They do have a bunch of good minerals out there. Okay, market and global reaction. The tariffs have triggered significant market volatility. The S&P 500 fell nearly 6% on April 4, its worst day since 2020, amid a global sell-off. As of this morning, US stock futures continued to slide, reflecting ongoing uncertainty. Posts on X and financial reports note conflicting rumors. Some suggest a 90-day tariff postponement, but the White House quickly dismissed this as fake news, affirming the tariffs remain in place. Canada imposed retaliatory tariffs on 20.5 billion of US goods, with more planned, though some were paused after Trump suspended certain USMCA related levies on March 6. Leaders are debating retaliation versus negotiation, with French President Emmanuel Macron urging a united response but no firm measures announced yet. Debating retaliation versus negotiation. Japan Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba called the 24% tariff a national crisis, with banking shares plunging. But isn't that a reciprocal tariff? So why do you have 24% tariff in the first place? But maybe Japan is like, hey, we want to protect our country. And that's the reason, and we want to protect our country specifically from outside products. We don't want other people to take control of the products that Japanese people are consuming. So maybe that's the reason they have this tariff. But the US looks at that tariff from a perspective that no, that is bad for us because that is bad for our business. Okay, that's interesting. I think again, negotiation is very important with specific companies. Like, is Japan doing 24% tariff to save their country to make their country more independent, or are they doing just to make US's life bad? But US would be coming back from a very capitalistic approach that, hey, let the best products win, like give an equal ground or common ground to everybody, and then let's see whose products win. Wow, so interesting, so interesting. Yeah, there has to be some sort of negotiation over here with Japan, because Japan, I don't think they are doing it. They're not trying to take a jab at US. Okay. And EU, I think EU has a 20% tariff. We don't know why they have that in the first place. And I think that is what Trump has been talking about, that, okay, uh, yeah, people are so mad at us imposing tariffs, but why does EU has 20% tariff on US imports in the first place? Okay. Economic and political context. Trump frames these tariffs as tool to address trade deficits and boost U.S. manufacturing, projecting 100 billion revenue from auto tariffs alone. Earlier successes like Rolls-Royce increasing U.S. production to avoid tariffs, reported March 24, are cited as evidence of effectiveness. Oh, so Rolls-Royce is already doing this. Wow, really cool. Okay, this makes sense. A lot of, like, even if we look at, like, this is never we have never seen something like this before. Like, Tesla is the biggest factory. We have not seen a lot of U.S. factories. A lot of we have only heard about U.S. factories being shut down. We have not heard a lot of modern U.S. factories being built, and maybe now is the time. Like, we recently saw Figure AI. I believe they are called Figure AI. Figure AI made this massive factory with for humanoids. Tesla already showcases has those beautiful drone footages going through, showcasing their entire factory, automated factory. And this is what US want more of. They just want, they just, I'm guessing Trump just don't want to be relied on China for all the basic products, and wants to make US very self reliant. And that's the bigger goal over here. Like, Rolls-Royce increasing US production to avoid tariffs, that's a big win. Like, okay, Rolls-Royce is now making products in US, and that's amazing. And Rolls-Royce is not even a US company, it's a European company. Wow. We actually don't know. Rolls-Royce was owned by BMW Group. BMW is a German group. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, it's still European. Sometimes what happens is, like, some parent American holding companies just buying up all these European legacy companies with, like, really good brand, and we start thinking that, oh, it's a European brand, but technically it's owned by Americans and we don't even know. However, critics, including economists and some Republicans, Senate vote in April to rebuking Canadian tariffs, warn of inflation, consumer price hikes, a potential 2300 iPhone, and a 60% recession year by year per JP Morgan. Yeah, I think one of the biggest win for USA would be to bring Apple production into the country, back into the country. That would be a big win. BlackRock CEO Larry Fink suggested on April 7th, okay, today, that the US might already be in recession, though he sees long-term buying opportunities in the market dip. Ongoing uncertainty. The situation remains fluid. Trump's administration, via Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, insists the tariffs will persist for days and weeks to reset global trade, while countries like Israel, facing a 17% tariff, and Taiwan 32%, are seeking exemptions through diplomatic channels. The threat of further escalation with China tomorrow could intensify the trade war, with markets and global leaders bracing for the fallout. What are all the reciprocal tariffs? All reciprocal tariffs visualized on tariff.lol. Oh, this is cool. This is cool. This is cool. Tariff.lol. Wow. Who did that? tariff? Lol. Let's see. No. I'm spelling tariff wrong. Okay. Tariff dot lol. Okay. Wow. Wow. So many tariffs. We don't even know what to. India 27%. Wow. So pretty much tariff on everything. Wow. Wow. So there's tariff against everybody. As of April 7, Donald Trump has implemented a comprehensive tariff policy under his Liberation Day initiative announced on April 2. Includes universal 10% baseline tariff on all US imports effective April 5, 2025, and higher reciprocal tariffs targeting 57 specific countries and territories set to begin on April 9, are designed to address perceived trade imbalances and are imposed under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, with rates varying by country based on a formula tied to trade deficits rather than mirroring exact foreign trade rates. Rate 10%. Universal baseline tariff applies to all imports into the US unless exempted or subject to higher reciprocal tariffs. Exemption includes certain goods like copper, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, lumber, energy products, and minerals unavailable domestically, as well as goods already under Section 232 tariffs, steel, aluminium, autos. Reciprocal tariffs by country entity. The following list details the higher reciprocal tariffs for the 57 countries singled out by the Trump administration. These rates are in addition to or replace the 10% baseline where applicable, and for some countries they stack with pre-existing tariffs. The rates are derived from a calculation involving the US trade deficit, with each country divided by US imports from that country, halved to create a discounted reciprocal rate, though the administration claims it also factors in non-tariff barriers and currency manipulation. China 34% additional to pre-existing 20% tariff, resulting in total effective rate of 54. European Union 20. Vietnam 46, Cambodia 49. Oh wow. So it's based on trade deficit, trade imbalances. So they're looking at, okay, if we are sending, let's say $100 to Vietnam, if US is making $100 from Vietnam, but Vietnam is making $146 from US, then Vietnam now has to give 46% tariff. Wow. So this shows you the countries where we get most of our stuff. So Vietnam, I'm guessing it's iPhones. Cambodia, I'm guessing it's clothes. I think I've heard, I don't know, but what are we getting from Europe? Europe, we are getting these luxury products and wines. I don't know what we're getting from Japan. From India, 26%. Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia. Wow, wow. 10%. It's crazy. Like US is like, okay. Other 57 listed countries, rates range from 11 to 50%, with specific figures for remaining countries like Russia not explicitly listed but facing baseline 10% despite a 2.5 billion surplus. Right, that makes sense because we are not importing anything from Russia. And smaller nations like Lesotho, up to 50% in some reports, though specifics vary. Keynotes: Canada and Mexico, exempt from the new reciprocal tariffs due to existing 25% tariff from March 2025 under IEEPA related to fentanyl and migration. And non-compliant energy potash at 10%. These remain in place rather than adopting the new reciprocal rates. China's total rate, the 34% reciprocal tariff, adds to the 20% already imposed, making a 54% effective rate. Trump threatened an additional 50% if China doesn't withdraw its 34% retaliatory tariff. Okay. Calculation method. The administration's formula uses 24 trade deficit data. China, 295 billion deficit divided by 439 billion imports. So 295 billion deficit, they are selling 295 billion, they are making 295 billion more than US, divided by 439 billion imports, divided by total value that they are sending to US. Right. So in total they are making 439 billion dollars from US, which is 295 more than what US is making from China. So the number comes to 67%, and then divide by 234. This differs from actual foreign tariff rates. China at 7.3, EU at 5.2, focusing instead on balancing trade deficits. So it's all about balancing trade deficits. Goods under Section 232 tariffs, 25% on steel, aluminum, and auto since March, April 25 are not subject to these new rates. The de minimis exemption for goods under $800 from China and Hong Kong ends May 225. Full scope and gaps. The White House released a chart on April 2 detailing tariffs from over 180 countries, with most not in the 57, facing only the 10% baseline. However, exact rates for all 180 plus countries beyond the highlighted 57 are not fully itemized in public releases. Really interesting. Okay, perfect. So that's the stream. We kind of got a really good idea of about how our stocks are doing today and what are the tariffs